Hi y'all, welcome to Autumn Reads a Tome. So I have tried to film this video about 3 times yesterday throughout the day. I might be better off just starting over. It's a new day. I'm here today to talk about the books that I read in 2025. As of today, which is December 18th, I have finished 36 books this year. And I'm currently reading two more. I'm reading Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, and I'm also reading The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store. And I'm blanking on the author's name, but I'll put the cover here. I've had more time to immersively read because my husband's father and his wife have been visiting from another country. They're here for Christmas and just for a couple of weeks to make it worth the travel time. So we've been all hanging out together and they've been spending a lot of time with my son, which gives me more downtime during the day to clean the house and also enjoy my hobbies. So I've had more time to work on my knit projects and I've had time and crochet projects and I've had more time to physically read and immersively read with audio. And it's been nice to have that extra time. They did leave yesterday to go to my brother-in-law's house because he does have 3 kids as well. So they're kind of hopping around to visit kids and grandkids, which, I mean, why wouldn't you do that when you're visiting? So that leaves me today with some time to film while my son takes his first nap. And so I'm taking advantage of that time. I am trying to navigate filming around the holiday season, and it's been pretty busy. So let's go ahead and get started with the books that I have finished this year. I'm going to go in reverse order, starting in January. The first book that I finished this year was Funny You Should Ask by Alyssa Sussman. I hope I'm saying that right. I'm not really sure. It was a cute little romance. It was like a celebrity actor meets reporter slash regular girl, and they fall in love. They don't talk for about 10 years and then they meet up again after this after she writes like this famous article that like puts her as a higher status of a reporter. And so time goes by. His career has kind of fallen because he has succumbed to alcoholism because he can't handle the pressures of fame. And there are parts of the story that felt genuine and I liked the connection, but I'm not sure if it was just the writing style. I did have some small issues that even though I read the book in January, I still remember. The author just overly uses italics in order to emphasize certain words that the main character thinks in her like inner monologue, and it was just a little bit distracting. uh, I just I know that a lot of authors do that. Colleen Hoover also does that a lot, and it's one of the reasons that I stopped reading her books. Obviously, other than the fact that a lot of them are very problematic and she romanticizes abuse. All that aside, the writing style alone, I've come to notice that when authors overly use italics, it is just distracting to me, and I don't like being told how to read a story, and it feels that way. Like it's just a little bit. Like, I want to decide which words to emphasize. I don't want you to tell me how to read your book. I don't know. Maybe that's me being a little bit too harsh, but that's how I felt. And I don't remember the ratings. I'm not really going to focus too much on the ratings here. If I feel like it in editing mode, maybe I'll put ratings in the corner. But I'm really just here to talk about the books and give you like short reviews, not necessarily with the star rating. One other thing that I did do this year, kind of spontaneously, was I reread the Twilight series. And the thing that started that curiosity was that I had been seeing people tandem reading Midnight Sun and Twilight. So many of the chapters not only happen like different POVs in the same moments of the story, but literally like the title of each chapter matches so that you it's almost like it was designed to be tandem read. Obviously, you have the extra things that Edward experiences without Bella, and that's what makes Midnight Sun longer. And I liked Midnight Sun, although we do learn how unhinged and controlling Edward really is, and his intrusive thoughts, and how just deeply insecure he is. A little bit surprising. But all that aside, I did tandem read Midnight Sun and Twilight, and I enjoyed it. It was probably the best experience that I had of my reread, other than my favorite book of the series, which we'll get to. So the book that took me the longest to read, I think, was New Moon. It's just never been my favorite. I do think it was good for Bella to get a break from Edward, just to kind of get a taste of reality and not be so enmeshed with somebody. I appreciated the point of view of like depression, because there are times in my life when I remember just feeling like time was passing by and I wasn't really living it. And the best example that I have of it is the early stages of postpartum when I had a baby. I now know that I definitely had at least mild postpartum depression. I'm very lucky that it resolved within the time frame that it did, because I know that there's lots of women who suffer for a very, very long time, and there's so much shame around being a new mom where it feels like you can't get help or reach out. And I have a lot of resources and support. I have a good support system as well, and I still struggled. So, I have a good grasp on just the way it feels, and I enjoyed that representation, but the rest of the story is just not it's not my favorite. The next thing that I read, cuz it was in between the Twilight books, I read the Fire Punch manga series because my husband is a big fan of Chainsaw Man, and it's the same creator. It's short. It's only 8 books long for the whole series. Spoilers in case anybody's curious about reading it if you like manga. Um First of all, I'll just give the disclaimer that it is very disturbing and graphic. And then, just to get into a little bit of spoilers, it is based in a dystopian world where people have powers. And I forget what they call them. There's a name that they give these people that have powers. And one of the types of powers is regeneration. And this is a world it's a dystopian future where the world is completely frozen, people are starving, and the only people who are guaranteed life are people who have regenerative powers, because their body constantly restores itself. So even if you are starving, you won't die because your stomach and your body will restore itself to the point where you don't technically need to eat. And that part of the story was interesting, the powers. The one thing that I will say is just it is very, very gory, graphic, very twisted. Like it's pretty demented, to be honest. If you've ever read the story, you know that. And also, my problem with the series is that the plot twists happened so frequently that it was really distracting from the story. And I reached a point where the plot twists happened so often that I didn't even know whether to even trust in the story, if that makes sense. Like, it just felt like nothing is, all of this is in this person's head. This is all imaginary. After all is said and done, it's just like, I think the pacing is just too fast in the end. I mean, if you've read the last book, you really know that they go through time quickly. I'm not going to sit here and say that I didn't like the manga, but there was enough things about it that I had that I take issue with that will make me say that it wasn't my favorite. It was just kind of, I feel kind of neutral about it at this point, because there was positives and negatives, and they really pull at your emotions. The creator tries to, but he just did too many things that were confusing, and it just took me out of it. So while I was reading that, I was also reading snippets of The Little Prince to my son at night, and I did include it in my books read this year because for a children's book, it's on the longer side. I read him a short story every day at least, like a board book, like The Hungry Caterpillar. I'm not going to count that in my books read in the year. But things like The Little Prince, that are a little bit longer, it took me a couple of weeks to read that to him, reading like snippets every day, because it's technically a chapter book, but the chapters are so short, and there's illustrations on almost every page. So that's the only reason that I counted it, and it's also just one of those classic books that I think even adults can get something out of, like a message or a moral, if you will. And I liked The Little Prince. I do think that I maybe should sit and read it in one sitting just for myself one of these days, and breaking it up made me potentially get less out of it. Just the distractions of each day and having only read parts of it. But I did enjoy it. I just think controversially that it might be a little bit overhyped. But I still liked it. The next novel that I finished was Eclipse, which is my favorite of the Twilight movies and books, because I don't want to defend myself too much, but I am Team Jacob. I know that I shouldn't be, but the nostalgic part of my heart that was Team Jacob when I was, in high school, I can't help it. I can't help but to think that she should have chosen Jacob or neither of them. That ultimately she should have chosen neither. But, if you're given the two male protagonist choices, I think she should have chosen Jacob. Just for the sake of getting to live more of a normal life. I don't know. I know it's obviously Bella's choice to make, and she feels like she fit in the vampire world, and that's the choice that she went with. I personally think that the scene after the mountain fight, when Jacob gets hurt and she goes to visit him when he's healing in his bedroom, and they have this deep conversation about how life should be, with her having chosen Jacob. That scene was just so like heart-wrenching, because even Bella, aside from all the manipulation and frankly SA that Jacob does do in this book, I don't know why my brain chooses to compartmentalize and just focus on this one sweet moment. I don't know why. Maybe that says something about me. But that moment is what makes me Team Jacob. And it makes me want to go back and just reread that scene, because maybe I'm out of touch. Because obviously the adult part of my brain is Team Neither. But I can't help it. I just think Jacob was the better choice. I really do. Anyways, after that, I went on to read Breaking Dawn, and I don't have much to say about Breaking Dawn. It's not my favorite. Obviously, it's the longest of the books, and we do get a dual POV, which is interesting. We get to switch between Bella and Jacob and back to Bella. I I liked the descriptions of what it's like to transition from human to vampire, and just how the whole world opens up to you basically now that you have all this power. But, there are some disgusting and inexcusable choices that Stephanie made in the whole series, but having the werewolves imprint on children. I remember a time before we knew the word grooming, and even then it felt like, is this okay? This is weird. And she kind of tries to explain it away, like, oh no, it's not like that until they become of age. And then it's like, well, yeah, but you're basically saying that even if it's not like that now, by the time they do get old enough, they've literally been groomed to be with this person. You know, if if it bothers you that Woody Allen married his adopted daughter, this should bother you too. And if that doesn't bother you, get help. Okay. So after that, I finished the Fire Punch series, and I've already talked as much about it as I think I should without going into like deep spoilers. If you're interested in reading about a dystopian world where people have powers and they're trying to fight for like freedom, I guess they're trying to get back a sense of normalcy for the human population. The next book that I read was the third book in the Empyrean series. So I read Onyx Storm, and I liked it. The ending was a cliffhanger, which obviously that's how the author gets you to keep going. The only problem I had with is that at the time, I don't know if things have changed. At the time of me finishing Onyx Storm, Rebecca Yarros has or had no plans for writing the next book or timeline because I know that it's probably a high pressure to write something that's this level of successful, considering that she's usually just writing contemporary romance. For this series to have just skyrocketed to the level of fame that it has, I don't think she expected when she wrote Fourth Wing. And there's a lot of people out there that will argue that it doesn't really deserve the success that it's gotten because there are a lot of fantasy books out there that basically just develop the world and the magic system a little bit better. I do think that if an author is going to write a book, that people will have the right to critique it, and I don't have a problem with that. But I also don't have a problem with people who just want to have a good time reading a silly fantasy book with lots of smut. I think that that's fine, and you don't need to overanalyze if you don't want to. And I think that that's the biggest reason that this book has gotten so much success, because obviously there are lots of very well written fantasy books out there in the world that do involve a lot more critical thinking and politics and like world building. You can find that if you're looking for it, but that's the beauty of fantasy and romantasy. It's like not everything has to be for everyone, you know? That already exists in the world somewhere else, and maybe you can make the argument that it deserves more recognition and fame. But unfortunately, we live in a world now where people don't always want to use critical thinking skills. You can say what you will about that, but I don't think there's anything wrong with fantasy being purely for the pleasure and escapism. I don't. Yeah, and I don't know if that's a hot take, but it's how I feel. I think people have the right to hate on any series that they want to, but things like Eye of the World or The Wheel of Time. That's just the first book. Game of Thrones. Even Patrick Rothfuss's The Name of the Wind. Those are I've never read Eye of the World, but I have read Game of Thrones and Name of the Wind, and those are very in depth, very broadly built worlds where the authors have put a lot of effort into the storyline, the character growth, and the magic systems. But they do involve a higher level of attention, critical thinking, and just memorizing. Because if you don't really delve into the worlds that these authors have created, you're just going to get lost. All of this to say that Onyx Storm was fun, Fourth Wing is fun, Iron Flame is fun, and it's just silly, fun time, and it doesn't need to be more than that. If you want it to be and it let you down, I'm really sorry for you. But those of us who get it. Okay, so I did read 3 nonfiction books this year, and the first one was Richard Dawkins' The Selfish Gene. I had always wanted to read a book by Richard Dawkins just because, as a person with a science background who grew up with a religious family, of course, I was exposed to the extremes on the spectrum of religion, of belief. And Richard Dawkins is obviously somebody that they call one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse because he's an avid atheist. And, he does lots of debates with people of different religions about his beliefs versus their beliefs. And obviously, you can go down that path. Whatever interests you, I think you have the right to explore. But me personally, I've always wanted to read one of his books just to see what his point of view was. And he also is an evolutionary biologist, so that's where a lot of his beliefs stem from. And so I could have just went straight for one of his like anti-religion books. I'm blanking on the title of his most famous one, but I'll put it here. But I decided to go with The Selfish Gene instead because it focuses on the biology side and it doesn't really focus on religion. So I thought it was really a fascinating read about how ultimately we are creatures that exist just to further our own bloodline. It's his argument basically is that it is when you break our bodies down to the simplest form that will continue into the next generation. It's our genetics, obviously, and the ultimate goal of any living creature is to reproduce in order to be immortal, I guess. And his argument is that that is inherently a selfish thing. And I thought it was an interesting book. And he goes into lots of explanations and lots of scenarios that were pretty cool to follow. And I highly recommend if you're interested in genetics or evolution or just biology, or even if Richard Dawkins is just like a controversial figure and you just want to read one of his works, I think that you should. And the next novel that I read was Sunrise on the Reaping. I wasn't expecting it to make me as emotional as it did because I had read the Hunger Games series before, and it just, oh my gosh, it made me so emotional throughout the story. I remember, I'm pretty sure I even cried the first time that they mentioned Effie Trinket. Just like the recall from the Hunger Games. And obviously, they did the movies differently, but Effie was so much more of a central figure in the movies than she was in the books. And for some reason, just the recall of like movie Effie was happening while I was reading Sunrise on the Reaping to the point where, like, the first moment that she appears, I cried. I loved Sunrise on the Reaping, and it triggered me into just going ahead and rereading the whole series. So the next book I read was The Hunger Games, and I think I read it in like two or 3 days, which isn't that impressive if you're a fast reader, but for somebody who spends most of their time with their kid, that meant that I was like zooming through it when I had downtime, which I don't normally do when I read other books. I like to kind of take my time and digest. But because it was a reread and because I was already on like that train of thought, I just read it so quickly and I ate it up. I remember the first time that I read The Hunger Games, and I think I read it in high school for the first time because I watched the movie when it came out, and then that made me want to read the books. And ever since then, I have kind of told myself that if there's a movie or a TV show that I want to watch, that I need to read the book or book series first. The next book that I read was Catching Fire, and I read that book just as fast. And I liked it. It's not my favorite book in the series. I enjoyed reading the scenes leading up to them breaking out of the arena in the 75th Hunger Games. And I remember that being so intense when I read the book the first time. And obviously it still is, but I think I read through it too quickly and it didn't evoke as much in me as the Hunger Games or Sunrise on the Reaping. But the next book that I finished was my next nonfiction of the year, which was Everything is Tuberculosis. As a person with a background in microbiology, even if I didn't know who John Green was, I probably still would have read this book because tuberculosis is one of the diseases that has always fascinated me as somebody who wanted to focus on infectious disease research. Tuberculosis really is just one of those diseases that I can't believe we haven't, if not eradicated, at least significantly reduced. I know that even COVID just absolutely made things go haywire because of the quarantining and just the lack of resources to care for people that had a comorbidity, being tuberculosis. And that's just one example. In the story, we follow John Green talking about a specific young boy named Henry and his struggle with very antibiotic resistant tuberculosis. And it was a very emotional story. And then he also just throws lots of different facts at you and history and just how basically you can take almost any major event in the world and tie it to tuberculosis somehow. He even found a way to link like the start of World War I with tuberculosis. It's just a very interesting take on a very ancient disease. And I enjoyed the way he did it, and it was a very short read too. So if you're interested in it at all, I would definitely give it a go. It's he writes it in like plain language to where anybody could read the book and learn something, which I appreciated a lot. The next novel that I read was Babel. I finally read Babel this year. It was my first dark academia book. I had read Yellowface by R.F. Kuang, but this was my first fantasy-ish book of hers. I mean, it is fantasy because there is a magic system and even though it takes place in our world, it's like our world but with magic. But I really enjoyed it. I will say that it was a little bit repetitive, and there is foreshadowing that is a little bit too on the nose. Like, I thought that she was trying to throw a red herring at us because it was just so obvious that I was like, no, this has to be a red herring. But no, it was just her basically telling you what's going to happen. Didn't love that. But the story itself, I did find interesting. The ending is not what I expected, and it made me sad. And I don't really want to say more than that. So, this book got me thinking about colonialism and greed. And so one day I was going for a walk and I found a little free library, and I noticed that it had Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. So I went ahead and grabbed it. I knew that it was a short read, and I knew that it also mentioned colonialism. I really enjoyed like the flowery purple prose in the beginning of the book. Like I wish I had it with me. I would show you, like, I highlighted a bunch of things. And I was having a really good time with the writing. Obviously the content is questionable, and there's lots of direct racism in the book. I mean, it was written in the 1800s, and it's about this guy traveling through the Congo. I think it's the Congo. And it's somewhere like deep in the jungles of Africa where he's trying to find a specific person. The whole book is about his journey, and he's supposed to have a purpose. And by the time we get to the end of the book, I don't want to spoil the ending, but it's one of those endings that makes you question what the point of the whole story was. At least that's what it did for me. Maybe I rushed through the ending too much and I could have gotten more out of it. I always tend to do that with shorter stories. Like, I'll take my time in the beginning and then I'll kind of rush from the middle to the end. I don't know why I do that. Maybe because I'm just like, oh, I'm so close. Let me just finish and like not really digest what I'm reading. But I remember by the end, I was just like, what? This is the book that people like love this story? I just remember being like confused and off put and just like, what? So maybe I need to revisit like the second and third chapters because I think the whole book's only 3 chapters. The next book that I read was Love Theoretically by Ali Hazelwood. It's the third Ali Hazelwood that I've read, and I bought this at the time when she was releasing, still quickly, but we've gotten to the point now where I cannot keep up with her releases. How does this woman have the time to write all these stories? And I kind of want to take a break at this point just because I'm overwhelmed with the amount of releases. This is how I felt in 2016 when I loved doing my makeup, and then makeup companies started taking advantage of like the fact that influencers will push, you know, audiences like you to buy things that they talk about. And I remember like one brand specifically that comes to mind is ColourPop. I used to actually enjoy their releases, and they felt intentional. But I'm at a point now where it's almost like fast fashion for makeup. I'm not even excited to buy makeup anymore. And you can see, like, I don't really wear it anymore because I just completely lost the motivation. The marketing is so aggressive and extreme, and the rapid release of products, I don't know. Maybe I just had a shift in mindset, and I'm glad that I did because I was wasting. I'm gonna be honest, okay? I don't really. It's a little embarrassing as an adult now that I can look back on like my college self who, didn't earn that much money, and I was spending thousands of dollars a year on makeup. And most of it I ended up donating or throwing away because makeup expires. Allie Hazelwood is now making me feel that way again. Like fast fashion, but for books. It doesn't feel good. And I'm not excited about the releases because it's just too fast for me. I'm trying to slow down and enjoy my time and enjoy my life, enjoy my hobbies, and I don't want to feel overwhelmed by something that's supposed to be relaxing for me. Does that make sense? I hope it does. So yeah, love theoretically. I enjoyed it. I thought her talking about Twilight all the time was cute and funny because I had just read the series over, and she talks all the time about how she should have gone with Alice, and I think that was cute and funny. I could see it, but and she's also obsessed with cheese, which I mean, who isn't? If you can eat it, if you can eat it and you're not vegan, I think we're all obsessed with cheese. But it was relatable. It was cute. Their little relationship that they had. I liked the main hero. I liked the main hero, and the relationship was cute. I liked it. It's like a silly romance novel, which I need every now and then to break up a book like Heart of Darkness. I needed something light after that. And the next book that I read was, I don't know if it's middle grade or if it's children's, but it's Tuck Everlasting. I remember seeing the movie I think I was in elementary or middle school when the movie came out. And I remember having like an instant crush on the male actor. And I don't know if it was some sort of like awakening in me. Like, I'm sure we've all had those moments, and it's a little embarrassing to talk about, but I remember being like, whoa, that boy's cute. And like the idea of living forever, I just thought it was really fascinating. And I had read the book when I was really young, but I wanted to reread it as an adult, and it is not as cute. It is not as cute. She's like 9 years old in the book, and that makes it gross. So I appreciate that they made Winnie older in the movie, but yeah, weird. And the ending in the book is it's heartwarming and sad at the same time. And I can't tell you why because I would spoil it. It's one of those very few instances where I might just say that the movie did it better. Why was she a little girl in the book? Why did she need to be a little girl? If they were going to add an angle of romance, she did not need to be a little girl. That's what makes it weird. The next book that I read was Delilah Green Doesn't Care, because I wanted to read an LGBTQ romance, and it was cute, but maybe I just didn't find it believable because it's enemies to lovers, and it's about these two women who have known each other since childhood, and one of them is like, that weird girl who's excluded and things, and everybody misunderstands her. And then she grows up, leaves town, and then she comes back for a wedding, and suddenly she sees this girl that she knew as a child, and for some reason they fall in love, and it's just like fine. And then the third act conflict is just another misunderstanding that could easily be explained if you just take 5 seconds. Yeah, like the actual sex scenes were kind of hot and they were nice, but yeah, the rest of it was pretty unbelievable. And I'm sorry if you like, it's a series. There's two more books because it's like a trio of friends that all, for some reason, they're all bi. Like, 'cause I don't know. I don't want to hate too much. I really don't. But like a trio of girlfriends, some of them were dating men, but now all of a sudden they're breaking up with their husbands and boyfriends and fiancés, and they're all dating women now, and it's just like a happy lesbian world. I don't know. I don't, maybe that happens in real life. I don't know. But it's just a little too good to be true, if you ask me. The next book that I finished was Mockingjay, the final book in the original trilogy of the Hunger Games. Personally, I actually think it's my favorite. I like that we actually get to step back and see the war unfolding, and we get to see Katniss's role as the Mockingjay, and we get to see the greed, the thirst for power from one side to the other. I just found it the politics is what makes this book the most interesting to me. Obviously, we have the Hunger Games and it's horrific, but you really delve into the greater picture in Mockingjay, and I found that really interesting. So I think it's my favorite book in the series. And I decided to go ahead and read Songbirds and the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. But before I finished that, I did read S.A. Cosby's new book that came out this year, King of Ashes. And I absolutely love S.A. Cosby. He's definitely like become one of my top authors that I get excited for every one of his new releases. And that's such a good feeling when you find an author that you know when they come out with something new that you're going to enjoy it. I thought it was really good. It wasn't my favorite of his books. My favorite to this day is Razorblade Tears. I just hold it to such a high standard. It was just it was like what reading that book felt like watching a movie. And I know that it is going to become a movie soon and I can't wait to watch it when it does. But King of Ashes was similarly cinematic, but it there was a little bit of it that was unrealistic because it does have like gang activity in the book, and some of the scenes did feel a little bit like this guy's a badass, watch out, you know, just a little bit like too cringy. But other than that, I still really enjoyed the story. Also, the main character Roman, there's times that if this story was real, he definitely would have been killed, like on the spot. You're not going to sit here and tell me that he talked his way out of every scenario that S.A. Cosby put him in. I just don't believe it. If he was really dealing with a gang as severe as the one mentioned in this book, he would have been dead, like in the first quarter of the book for sure. But I still enjoyed the story regardless. I enjoyed reading about the three different siblings and their own issues that they have. Like, Roman obviously has issues about his mom for a good reason. His brother Dante, struggles with addiction and, kind of growing up. And then his sister is the one that had to take on the burden of their family after their mother passes away. And people leave her out of things. She has the highest level of expectations set on her. And so I can relate to that being the oldest daughter in my own family. Like there really is a level of expectation placed on daughters that sons just don't have. And maybe some of you can relate to that. But if any of you are an oldest daughter, maybe you can agree with me or disagree with me that we have a level of expectation set on us that our siblings just don't. And I really felt that in their sister. And I'm forgetting her name. It started with an N. Nevea? I think it was Nevea. But I really enjoyed it. And after this, I did go ahead and read Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. And because it was a reread, I kind of rushed through it. And I really just wanted to see the callbacks. Because in Songbirds and Snakes, they do talk about snow and the experiences that Haymitch goes through. And I just wanted to see how much in common they had since they're both prequels to the Hunger Games. So I went ahead and just read it. And it was good, but it wasn't as good as my first read, I will just say. The next book that I finished, it took me a really long time to read because I just read it in snippets over time, and it was the third book in the Outlander series, which is Voyager. I enjoyed it. It is the book where, spoilers, it's the book where Jamie and Claire finally meet again after spending 20 years apart. And then just like shenanigans happen. They end up in America, or they end up in the Americas, which, if you've watched the show or read the books. And I liked it. And I'm excited to read the next one. But I really take my time with the Outlander books because they're a pretty big commitment. They're all over 1,000 pages long because I have the mass market paperbacks, which I honestly hate, but they were such a good price that I couldn't pass them up. And I knew that I wanted the whole series. So I went ahead and got them, but that makes each book over 1,000 pages. So I just take my time. I'll give sometimes up to a year between reading the next book. I think I've been reading the series over the last 2 to 3 years, and I just finished the third book. So I'm really not in a hurry. I know that there's, I think, only one more book planned for the series, and the show has one more season left, and they're wrapping the last 3 books into this last season. I don't know how they're gonna do it, but I gotta I gotta read the books, I guess. I don't know. I'm gonna have finished the show. I guess that's another thing that I broke my rule. I did watch Outlander before I read the books. Okay. The next book that I finished was The Perks of Being a Wallflower. I always loved the movie and I wanted to read the book for a long time. And I could have read it years ago because it's so short. And I don't know why it took me so long, but I really enjoyed my reading experience. You you really get more of the emotion and the distress, the internal distress that Charlie has through the letters that he's writing to you as the reader. And it was just it's sad and heartwarming and lots of things in between. And I can't get into a lot of it without spoiling, but if you want to read about teenage angst, it's a good one. I will say that there's lots of trigger warnings that you should look up if you don't already know, because it's a pretty popular movie and book. Okay, the next book that I read was Cloud Atlas, which I did a whole two-part reading vlog about. And that book was such a roller coaster of emotions. I really do think I felt the full spectrum. Like, I was from literally everything from times when I was flat out bored and thought about DNFing to like so engrossed that I couldn't focus on anything else. And you go through a time period of hundreds to thousands of years, if I'm not mistaken. It's at least hundreds of years. You start out in the 1800s and you make your way into a dystopian future where man has fallen. And I guess we don't really know how much time lapses. I think they try to estimate it in the movie. And I will just say the movie does not do the book justice. They tried to do some weird thing there where so the book does like to include an element of reincarnation, but the way that the movie did it by making the cast wear different costumes and even turning people into different races just to make them be reincarnated into somebody else, that was so weird. I don't know what that was. The book, however, was so interesting in how you go through time, how you are dropped into a moment with your main character because there's five different sections. Each section has a main character. You're just dropped into their time and you have to catch up to the scenario of the world that is built around this character. And I just thought it was so interesting the way that the author did it, David Mitchell. I do have that book, that two-part vlog. I will say it's full of spoilers, but it's worth it if you don't plan on reading the book and you've already seen the movie or something like that. Because I do go into like an analysis of the characters. I read quotes from the book for throughout each character's point of view, and the story's gonna stick with me for a long time. It There was moments when I had like no hope for the future of humanity because it felt like I was reading nonfiction. And then there's times when the author reinstates your hope. Yeah. There's times when you don't know what you're reading is real or not. Obviously it's fiction, but like if the what's going to be revealed to you in the next storyline will tell you. I don't want to spoil, but basically you just have to question everything. The next book that I read was Misery by Stephen King. I had always wanted to read Misery because I wanted to first of all watch the movie. But second of all, I wanted to read a Stephen King book that didn't focus on like monsters or ghosts or like paranormal things. I wanted it to be like just a pure horror set in reality. And it was really interesting. I know that Stephen King has talked about struggles with addiction in the past, and the main character Paul in Misery struggles with addiction that is brought on by the lady who has kidnapped him, which they totally left out of the movie. I thought that was weird because it's one of the reasons that Stephen King even wrote Misery was to have a moment to go into, the struggles of addiction. So I thought it was weird that they left it out of the movie. They still have, the use of narcotics, but in the book he becomes fully addicted and reliant on the person who has kidnapped him and on these on Novrin, which is it's a fictional version of a painkiller. I really liked Annie as a villain because she was so complex psychologically, and you just really never knew what she was going to do or say next, because there was times when she seemed almost normal, and then obviously she's not normal because she kidnapped a man to stay in her house and write a novel for her. Maybe you consider that a spoiler, but it's in the synopsis. It's what the story is. So I'm not going to get into what she does to him or how long he's there or any, of the details around that, the things that she says and does. I really liked it. I know that it's a hit or miss for people, but I'm really glad that for me it was a hit. And I'm excited to read my next Stephen King. I did buy Cujo on sale after I finished this, and I'm considering reading it soon, but I might just go ahead and wait till next spooky season. I've mentioned in the past that I don't necessarily need to read seasonally. It just really depends on my mood. So, on that note, the next book that I did read was my Halloween read, and it was The Reformatory by Tananarive. I was mind blown by that book. I've read reviews where people say that that book is boring to them, and I'm so sorry that if I'm so sorry if that was the case for you. Maybe it just isn't for you, but that book spoke to me so deeply. I felt so much for the characters, the two siblings, Gloria and Robbie in this book. I loved the story. I loved the writing. I wanted them to have like freedoms and rights that they deserve. I The awful experiences that they have both in a paranormal aspect and just in like the 1950s Florida for black children and adults. It just made me feel so much. And I will definitely be revisiting the story. There were times that it really did scare me because I'm kind of a baby when it comes to paranormal horror, but I felt so much for them, and I was sad to finish the book. I will say one con that I have is that the ending was wrapped up a little bit too quickly, and I felt like I would have liked to get more out of the ending, but the journey to get there, I absolutely loved. I mean, I didn't love the things that they went through, but I love the way that Tanana Reevdu told the story. Her writing is so beautiful. She's so good at choosing which foreshadowing elements to make obvious and which ones to be subtle. I loved it so much. Her writing, I definitely can't wait to read another one of her stories in the future sometime. I had a great time with that book. And then the next book that I read, because so because they of the horror, the paranormal elements, and the reformatory that genuinely did scare me, I decided that I couldn't read the book at night. And so my nighttime read while I was reading the reformatory was The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. And it's one of those books that is hyped up and it deserves the hype. I really enjoyed The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. Addie was such an interesting character to follow. The one thing that I think is good and bad is that we go back in time to the 1700s, but it's still written in modern like language and dialogue. So even though we're in a historical setting, it feels a little bit too modern to be realistic. But I also appreciate it because it makes it more of an easy read. That was one of the problems that I had in the beginning of Cloud Atlas, was that we go back to the 1800s and the language matches. So there's times when you like really have to involve yourself and focus on the writing, otherwise you'll miss things. Just because we don't talk that way anymore. We don't use like SAT vocabulary words in everyday language like they did back then. And I thought that was clever that David Mitchell did that, but it also meant that you had to focus really intently on each time period so that you could follow the dialogue and just the inner dialogue as well. But with The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, she wrote the whole book in the same style, even throughout different time periods. So that made it easier to read, which you can consider a negative or a positive, depending on how much of a history buff you are. I consider it a positive because I was treating it as a lighthearted read, and I enjoyed it a lot. I think I would revisit it. I liked the story. I liked the resolve. I liked the romance, the main romance, and it was a good time. I'm glad that I finally read it. I think it does deserve the hype. V.E. Schwab is a really good writer, and I can't wait to read another one of her books because it was actually her first novel that I've read. And then lastly, I did read a third nonfiction this year, and that was Empire of Pain, which I mentioned in my last reading vlog. I was kind of going to deep dive into like how angry and emotional this book made me, but this video is already I've already been filming for over an hour, so I'm not really sure how to go about this. But I will just say that this book talks about the Sackler family, three generations of this family who worked in medicine and pharmaceuticals and advertising and sales. The growth of this family's wealth led to them producing and marketing and selling and making billions of dollars on what we now know of as Oxycontin, which is what they called a non addictive, long term opioid. And we now know that, hundreds of thousands of Americans alone have died of addiction due due to this drug. They have tried to make the argument that the drug doesn't make the addict, it's just that the addict is the abuser. But this journalist, Patrick Radden Keefe, has a point in the story where he brings up statistics in 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 um in the different states that had levels of addiction to OxyContin and opioids in general. And some of the statistics have shown that in states that made it more difficult to access OxyContin, they had less addiction, not just to OxyContin, but other opioids, including heroin, which suggests that OxyContin does lead people down the route to stronger and more illicit opioids. And the whole story was just enraging and saddening. And, you're reading about the generations of this family and everything that they went through from the moment that the first generation came to America. And they did go through a lot of hard times and struggles. But at the end of the day, when it came to how they responded to the lawsuits against them regarding the harm that OxyContin caused, they really were just so hands off, and they just were so they just lacked empathy in their own power, and they pushed the blame to other people as much as they could. And when they couldn't do that, instead of actually arguing for themselves, instead of admitting fault or wrongdoing, what they would do instead is to defame whoever was arguing against them so that they were seen as uncredible. And the money that they spent on lawyers just to avoid the problems, the fact that the company went bankrupt and now nobody is allowed to pursue legal cases against the company or the family for anything revolving around OxyContin, or I think pharmaceuticals in general, possibly. The whole thing is just so enraging, and I just can't believe that there are families and people out there that are like this. Just the level of selfishness and greed. They never admitted wrongdoing, and they never had to, and they never will, because the judge that proceeded over the bankruptcy wouldn't even listen to the victims. He shut them down so many times when they tried to tell their stories. The whole thing is just awful. And that's really all that I can say. Yeah. I could talk about this for a really long time, but I don't have the time, and I think you should just read the story for yourself. The audiobook is narrated by the author, and There are moments when you can tell that he's passionate about the words that he wrote because of the inflection of his tone. And I just highly recommend it. If you have the time to read it or listen to the audiobook, I really recommend it. Even just learning the history of the family and the dynasty that they created, even their links to the worlds of culture and education, like the money that they would donate to schools and museums. Oh, my dog is snoring. It was just so fascinating, the whole thing. Honestly, learning about it, I think, is valuable. I think we do need to learn about families like this, and I don't think it hurts to learn about the dynamic between the government and the pharmaceutical industry. Yeah, it was very enlightening and educational and just interesting in general. So I recommend it a lot. And then I won't count them because I haven't finished, but there's a good chance that by the end of the year I will have finished at least one more book, whether that's Rebecca or the Heaven and Earth grocery store or both. And I'll just include them in a future video if I ever decide to do like a winter reading wrap up or something, depending on how much I read next year. I always set my goal to 24 books a year so that I read at least 2 books a month, and I'm happy with that. If I just sat and listened to audiobooks all day long on, 2 point speed, I would get a lot more reading done, but I really these days like to sit and enjoy my time reading slowly. I can skim read pretty quickly, and I've done that with some books that I've read, but I just don't enjoy it as much. I'm jealous of the people who genuinely read quickly and can actually retain what they're reading, but I'm just not like that, and I'm trying to take each day one day at a time so that I can enjoy the years of my son's life while he's really young. Even if next year I do only read 24 books, I'll be happy with that. That was the goal that I set this year, and I read 36 so far, hopefully up to 38. But I reached, as of, today, 150% of my goal, and I'll take it. So, on to 2026. Can't wait to see what the year has in store. I don't have any specific plans right now for reading, but I might make a list for a winter TBR or a yearly TBR. Haven't decided yet. And I'm not really in a hurry. I'm trying to enjoy the holiday season. We're going to spend Christmas Eve with the whole family. They're all going to come here and spend the night. I think we're going to do like a giant camp out in the living room with the kids. I can't wait. So, I'm just living my life day to day. I forgot to drink it in this video, but I poured myself a glass of eggnog with my holiday Frenchy glasses. This is the one like old person thing that I do partake in is eggnog for the holidays at least. But I do just the the store bought one. I don't make it or add alcohol. It's just I just drink it as is. I add a little bit of nutmeg. And I forgot to drink it throughout this video. It's the holidays. I'm going to enjoy the time that I have with family that I get to see only once a year or once every 2 years. And I'm just really happy to live the life that I get to live every day. I'm so blessed to get to stay home and raise my son. I'm blessed to have gotten a chance to get a house where we can actually host family. We used to live in a 2-bedroom apartment, and we just saved and saved and saved as much as we could so that we could finally buy a house. And we did get help from family because I don't know how anybody buys a house these days without help. Um, so we're just very, very blessed and lucky, and I know that, and I recognize that, and I am grateful for my life. I'm grateful for my family, and I'm grateful for you, just for being here. To hear me ramble and talk forever about these books that I read, and I'm just glad that we live in a world now where we can share our thoughts with people all around the world. And I hope that you can contribute as well. Let me know what your, favorite books of the year. Maybe you could think of your top 5 or 10 and put them in the comments. Just, I want to hear about the books that you read this year. Maybe you could tell me your worst books too. Oh, I guess I should just say, I was going to rank the books, from worst to best, but I decided to just go in reverse order, January to now, the books that I read. But I did have a favorite book this year, and I can easily say that it was The Reformatory by Tananarive Due. I haven't felt that way while reading a story in a long time, where I connected with characters so much and felt, at the edge of my seat waiting to see what would happen to them. The descriptions of the paranormal, oh, I can still recall it. Even in the middle of the day, I can whew, it makes my skin crawl. Ghosts are not my thing. So, yeah, it was definitely my favorite book of the year. I thought about naming a worst, but I don't really want to focus on the negative, and I feel like I had a really good reading year. So, if I even tried to name a worst book of the year, I would just be grasping at straws. So, yeah, all of this to say that I really appreciate you being here and watching my videos. And, here's to 2026. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.